Super Rugby has optional defence, and European Rugby is just plain old boring. These are some of the stereotypes that come up a fair bit in comments on the internet. Whether you listen to it or not is kind of up to you. I've been looking at some numbers for these competitions because I watch Super Rugby in the Champions Cup. I watch the URC. I see a bit of the Premiership every now and again. Likewise, I see the top 14 games from time to time, and I can enjoy them all. You're going to probably enjoy whichever competition your team plays in the most, which is totally normal. But how true or not are the stereotypes about the competitions either being boring? Is Super Rugby that much more open and defence optional and so many loads more tries? Or is it tighter than all that? Are the European competitions flourishing with their attacking play as well? Let's have a look at some stats from the Super Rugby, from the Champions Cup, the URC, the Premiership, and the top 14 this season. I'll even sprinkle in a little bit of Japan for context as well. And you guys can let us know your thoughts on each of the competitions. But as I say, I enjoy them all for what they are. Super Rugby, the tackle percentage is the one that gets focused on a lot. How is Super Rugby's tackle percentage? Are guys falling off tackles left, right, and centre? I will say tackle percentage is definitely not the be-all and end-all for a defensive shift because there are plenty of times guys can score tries without a tackle being broken. Like you could concede a maul try and still have a tackle completion percentage of 100. A guy could get a clean break where nobody even lays a hand on him and your team could still have a tackle completion rate of 100 even if you've just conceded a try because not every try comes from a broken tackle, but they are a generally reasonably accurate indicator of success rates for tackles. There are some teams who play really kind of blitz defenses, which tends to have a lower defensive rate, but generally they are an indicator of how well or not teams are defending. Which league of the ones we're going to look at has the lowest tackle completion rate? It is the Premiership, who are at 85, and the Champions Cup is also pretty much at 85. If you round them, they're the same, but the Premiership's numbers were slightly lower than the Champions Cup, which games I've kind of isolated off. 85 is like solid. That's the number that I would say if you wanted to look at successful sides. Generally, 85 and up is where you want to be with your tackle rates, just from all the game stats that I look at. But that being said, Bath don't have a great tackle rate in the Premiership, and they're doing okay. They're at 83, whereas Northampton are at 87. That's the kind of spectrum of like the highest and the lowest side. So there's not that much in it. There's nobody who's in the 70s and there's nobody who's in the 90s in the Premiership. The Champions Cup does have a bit more of an extreme because the competition is not that well balanced. I think fans of the Champions Cup would say there's a lot of lopsided games and it shows in the numbers. So 85% is the average, but like Toulouse, their tackle completion rate is 90. Whereas Exeter, who didn't have the best time of it, they're at 78. And 78 is lower than any team we will look at for any competition. So that's genuinely the worst. But as I said, there were some pretty big scorelines put on in some of the Champions Cup games this year. The top 14 and the URC are both on 86. The URC's numbers are slightly higher if you want to go to numbers smaller than 1%. But Racing the best and Castra the worst of the top 14 sides, but that's the difference between 89 and 83. So again, nobody's in the 90s, nobody's in the 70s. And for the URC, Glasgow are genuinely in the 90s, 90% tackle completion rate, which is phenomenal. The Stormers are the lowest of the URC sides at 84. But the Stormers do have some good attacking numbers, which we will get to in a minute. Super Rugby's tackle completion rate is 87%, which is higher than everybody else, which maybe goes against the stereotype. They do make tackles in Super Rugby, believe it or not. The Reds are at 90%, like I said, same as Glasgow. The Drua do fit their stereotype, 100%. The Fijian side, their tackle completion rate of 82 is the lowest of all of the sides in Super Rugby and genuinely lower than pretty much every other team, apart from Exeter's Champions Cup record. Drua's tackle completion rate is not very good, and they are the bottom side in Super Rugby, so that kind of makes sense. Interestingly, Super Rugby also has the highest number of tackles made per game. I don't have the numbers for ball and play time, but Super Rugby's official channels have been saying that their ball and play time is up, and ball and play time is usually going to mean more tackles. So 175 tackles a game in Super Rugby is the most. Top 14's at 143 at the least. The other competitions are kind of all in the middle. So yeah, top 14 games have more guys having shots at poles and whatnot. So maybe that means a little bit less ball and play time, but we'll get to some of those numbers in a bit. So yeah, initial thoughts on the tackle completion rates. You guys let us know your thoughts. Japan, if you did want to sprinkle them in as well, would genuinely be the lowest of all the competitions at 84. So even lower than the Premiership's numbers. So that stereotype maybe rings a little bit true. But what about clean breaks? Like I said, you can get a clean break and there's no missed tackle. Interestingly, the Premiership is the easiest competition to get clean breaks in terms of how many carries does it take a team before they will get a clean break. The Premiership, it's like around 16. The Champions Cup, it's 19. So both of those competitions, you will watch less than 20 carries and then someone's going to get into space, just on average. But the Premiership is the most open. Also Japan. Japan was also 16. Just kind of like the Premiership. Gloucester and Bristol, two exponents are getting themselves into some space, whereas Newcastle at the other end struggle to generate clean breaks in comparison. They are also not doing that well this year. The Champions Cup sides, Toulouse, again, getting clean breaks for fun, so that kind of makes sense. The tackle percentage is really high. Clean breaks rate is pretty easily generated, whereas like sides like Bath and La Rochelle and whatnot struggled with that aspect this year. Super Rugby's next. So Super Rugby's kind of in the middle. You're looking at 20 carries before you see a clean break. So you're going to have to wait longer than if you were watching the Premiership or Champions Cup, but not as long as if you're watching the URC or Top 14. So maybe those competitions in that regard are slightly tighter. The Drua, though, 16. Doesn't take them many carries to get a clean break, which again fits the stereotype. They prefer attack than defense. The Blues, the other end of the scale, really struggling. My Blues, also towards the bottom end of the Super Rugby table this year, taking 29 carries to get a clean break. It's been a tough watch this year for my Blues. URC is next, one higher than Super Rugby on 21 carries per clean break. The Stormers, the lowest, very similar to the Drua numbers, man. Lowest tackle rate, but highest rated getting clean breaks. And then the Dragons, bottom of the URC, they struggle to get clean breaks. And then the top 14 is the highest one, so you're going to watch more guys truck the ball up before you see a clean break in the top 14 than any other. Bordeaux is the most open, whereas Montpellier, kind of like my Blues, they are less likely to get themselves into that kind of bit of open space. 32 carries. Even by my Blues standards, these guys are at kind of another level. Now, what about tries? Tries per team per game. Super Rugby sides will score on average just over 4 tries a game, 4.2, and that is the highest of the sides we're going to look at. Unless you include Japan. Japan's slightly higher, 4.3 tries per team per game. The Champions Cup's not far behind, also 4 tries per team per game. You get some blown out results with Bordeaux and Toulouse, certainly bumping up those numbers. And the Premiership's also pretty similar, 3.9. Again, the big boys in terms of like Bath and whatnot are the ones getting a few of those. Then there's a little bit of a drop. The URC is 3.3 and the top 14 is 2.8. So teams in the top 14 don't score as many tries, but they are the one genuine outlier in terms of penalties taken per game, because like Super Rugby, the Champions Cup, the Premiership and the URC is a little bit higher, but most of them teams will opt for on average around about 1 penalty per game. So you might see a game where there's 2 penalties hit in a game, whereas the top 14 sides are genuinely double. Each side is on average getting 2 penalties a game. So maybe that's the threat of relegation, means these sides need to keep things a bit tighter, more likely to opt for 3 than the other competitions where they go for tries. The other one stat I did look at was kicking from hand. Is there more boot to ball just around the paddock in the competitions? There's very little between it. Each team is on average around about 25 kicks a game. Some are higher, some are lower, but they pretty much average out across all the leagues. So there you go. Similar amounts of tries across the leagues. Tackle percentages are all kind of within a couple of percent of each other. Super Rugby has a fair few clean breaks, but not as many as the Premiership, just in terms of how hard teams have to work to get them. The top 4 team seems to be pretty tight in terms of tries scored, but you guys let us know your thoughts. Are there any surprising numbers there? Maybe this is one we can look at the end of the season, because it'll be interesting to see come the conclusion once we've had all those kind of super tight finals matches, if there are any shifts in the numbers. But you guys let us know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. Ta-ra.